What I'm interested in is writing about things of people who have gotten beyond the beginning. They've tried to be married and failed, and now they're trying to decide whether to try again, or they tried twice and it failed, and they find themselves in love. Or people find out that they've come into middle age alive, not like, you know, when you're a kid and people after 35 were old people, but, you know, you're on fire.
Yeah.
Not that you're wearing flared trousers and you have a mod haircut. I don't mean that. But your heart's still bright. What do you do with that? Anyhow, I'm interested in writing some poetry because we don't have any set of values really for adults. Because adults always put their hair up in a bun and push the babies around, or they went out to the office and worked and came home and went to sleep. But now we've got a whole new kind of thing. People stay alive a long time, not just in years, but the heart can stay a long time. You see mothers now with 4 kids that are smashing, you know, wild, sexy. You see guys that are, 50 years old that are alive. Well, what pertains to them? Where do they turn? They can't turn to Romeo and Juliet and that ecstasy of innocence. What do you do with them? Anyhow, this is a poem about a certain stage you get to. This is when I was living in Denmark a couple of years ago. And I'm walking in one of the beautiful Copenhagen gardens. I tell you, you know what the cargo cult is?
Mm-mm.
It's those things that happen in the Pacific where when the natives saw the Americans come up and immediately planes came down and put all this treasure out and boats put in. So then afterwards they tried to find the magic. And they would preach a cargo cult. If you throw your gods into the sea or you stop having sex for a while, and then the ships will come and give you, and the birds will come back. And they would make primitive airplanes out of crossed logs or stuff like that. For me, it's love. Because they never put in, the treasure never comes, no matter what you sacrifice. Okay. A description of happiness in Copenhagen. All this windless day, snow fell into the king's garden, where I walked, perfecting and growing old, abandoning one by one everybody, randomly in love with the paradise furnace of my mind. Now I sit in the dark, dreaming of a marble sun and its strictness. This is to tell you I am not coming back, to tell you instead of my private life among people who must wrestle their hearts in order to feel anything, as though it were unnatural. What I master by day still lapses in the night, but I go on with the cargo cult, blindly feeling the snow come down, learning to flower by tightening. I was partially in protest against the phrase everybody loved, let it all hang out. I thought it was most frightening kind of, to be around the kind of people I know letting it all hang out is a very, very unrewarding kind of, anyhow. This is a poem you said about travels, but this is kind of a journey in a different sense. That's when I was living in Mexico. I tell you that I don't write tourist poems. I'm not really writing my poem in Kyoto looking at the temple, my poem in Paris in chestnut time or whatever. But I like the particularity that the poem comes from. I don't think it's exploiting that, it just happens to be there. Except that the title, Elephant Hunt in Guadalajara, works off of the fact that, of course, there are no elephants in Guadalajara. This is also 7 lines. Elephant Hunt in Guadalajara. El Serape's floor show finished at 1. The lights went off and strong girls came like tin moths to dance carefully with us for 8 cents. Now, at last, the old tenor has begun the deadly 3 o'clock show with its granite Mexican music. The girls are asleep in the side booths. Where is it? Where in the name of Christ is it? Let me take some water.
I'm really enjoying these, Jack.
Well, it's a pleasure to read them because I've lived with these. Some of this, like here's a poem I've been working on for 12 years, and I finished it night before last. And I've been working on it. I mean, it's gone through hundreds of versions. Because one of the things I'm in love with is if I say craft, I'm not interested in academic poetry and how well you make the sonnet. I don't care about that. But I'm sure you found from the people you mentioned that you like, you must get in love with the craft for yourself. It's like what you have to say is your wife. The craft is your mistress. And she has a legitimate function. It's not the wife's function. It's not maybe she's not equal to the wife, but she's something special, sort of for you. I read in the Chronicle one time, somebody wrote in and said, to a question man kind of column, do the dancing elephants of India dance naturally? Are they born with the instinct to dance? Or are they trained to dance? And the answer was, they're not born that way. They are trained to dance. However, oddly enough, there have been many reports of the elephants after they've been trained. People will come across them in clearings in the jungle at night with nobody around, dancing in the moonlight. That's what I think happens to a poet who falls in love with poetry. It's not to get the National Endowment of the Arts grant or to have a big audience or turn on. That's all. And you write them to make women, and those are all fine motives. But there's a kind of thing you use poetry for yourself, and the craft, almost as much as anything else, is that.
Yeah, it keeps you clean.
It keeps you clean. It's very true. It keeps you clean, and it also keeps you in love. Because if the fashion changes, you're not fashionable anymore, or somebody else is getting the attention you deserve, or something like that. You write because you have your poetry. They can't take it away from you. So this is one of the poems I wrote. It's kind of magic. It kind of came to me, and the poem wasn't right, and at the same time I didn't want to lose the music, and so it was very hard to work on it because I was afraid all the time that in getting what it was about I would lose the other thing. And this goes back to 1948 when I first went to Paris, and it was just after the war, and there were no cars, no gasoline. Paris was silent. Everybody was poor. And I'd walk all day. I didn't have any money. I was starving. I was to sleep because there was no meals and stuff. But that's when I began. That's when I was a kind of a lad in the old sense of that word. And this is called Pewter. It's longer. It's about 15 lines. In terms of craft, the first line is, thrushes flying under the lake, nightingales singing underground. For me, in terms of craft, that's to say, this is not a William Carlos Williams poem. It's not a realistic poem. It's like you're in the middle of The Tempest of Shakespeare. You're in the middle of maybe Midsummer Night's Dream. The laws aren't quite the right laws. Something else is going on. People might float to the ceiling. But on the other hand, it's not saying, look at me, I'm surreal. Isn't that far out? Thrushes don't fly under lakes. Nightingales don't sing underground. That's far out. I take that for granted. I'm not. That kind of easy rush is I don't get anything out of that. I want to sort of be seen, and then, of course, Pewter. Thrushes flying under the lake, nightingales singing underground. Yes, my king. Paris, hungry and leisurely, just after the war. Yes. America falling into history. Yes. Those silent winter afternoons along the Seine when I was always alone. Yes, my king. Rain everywhere in the forests of Pennsylvania as the king's coach lumbered and was caught, and all stood gathered close while the black trees went on and on. Ah, my king, it was the sweet time of our lives. The rain shining on their faces, the loud sound of rain around. Like the nights we waited, knowing she was probably warm and moaning under another. That cold mansard looked out over the huge hospital of the poor, and far down on Paris, gray and beautiful under the February rain. Between that and this, that yes and this yes. Between, my king, that forgotten girl, forgotten pain, and the consequence. Those lovely, long-ago night bells which I did not notice grow more and more apparent in me, like pewter expanding as it cools. Yes, like a king halted in the great forest of Pennsylvania, like me singing these prison songs to praise the gray, to praise her, to tell of me, yes, and of you, my king. Let me see, we have time for what, about 2 more poems?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Let me read a very short poem to show you I'm not totally grim.
These haven't been grim at all.
Okay. This is a poem. It's really what somebody said to me when I was up in the north of California. And the girl named Gata said the poem in the first, if I see it. Otherwise I won't read it. Yeah. It's someplace in all
what a
these
ton
poems.
of poems you have here.
Let's see if I can remember it. It goes something like this. The guy who raped her came back again last night, but her former husband was there and said, "Why did you rape her, you son of a bitch?" "Because she let me," he said. "Of course she let you. Because you hit her, that's why she let you." And it dwindled away into definitions. Okay, let me read one more poem. I lived for 3 years in Greece with a woman I was with for 8 years named Linda. She's a very fine poet. And we lived on what is now pretty well known was Atlantis, or was half of Atlantis. It was
Santorini?
Santorini. And we lived on the other side where the boats, the tourists don't put in. And we lived way out in the fields. And this goes back to about 10 years before I had crushed my spine and smashed all my body and stuff like that. So that's the kind of background for this. And we're living out in the fields there. And then we came back to San Francisco, and she left me, and I'm sitting up on Potrero Hill looking out my window. It's called All the Way From There to Here, and it's 2 pages. From my hill I look down on the freeway and over to a gull lifting black against the gray ridge. It lifts slowly higher and enters the bright sky. Surely our long, steady dying brings us to a state of grace. What else can I call this bafflement? From here I deal with my irrelevance to love and with the bewildering tenderness of which I am composed. The sun goes down and comes up again. The moon comes up and goes down. I live with the morning air and the different airs of night. I begin to grow old. The ships put out and are lost, put out and are lost, leaving me with their haunting awkwardness and the imperfection of birds, while all the time I work to understand this happiness I have come into. What I remember of my 9-story fall down through the great pine is the rush of green, and the softness of my regret in the ambulance going to my nearby death, looking out at the trees leaving me. What I remember of my crushed spine is watching Linda faint again and again, sliding down the white X-ray room wall as my sweet body flailed on the steel table, unable to manage the bulk of pain. That, and watching in the years after for the burning in my fingertips which would announce, the doctor said, the beginning of paralysis. What I remember of that long watching in San Francisco and Greece and Denmark and London and Greece is Linda cooking lunch. Linda walking from Monolithos to Thera with me daily across the island, her gold and blondness coming up out of the blue Aegean. That's what I remember most of death, the beauty of us in that bare Greek Eden as the marriage steadily failed.